In this episode, we speak to Oanh Thi Tran. She is the Commissioner for the Fair Work Commission. We dive into some personal family stories of her refugee journey from Vietnam in the early 80s. We go through her inspiration in working through social justice in the employment space, and also cool, fun stories about cycle touring through Europe in a career break over 9 months as well. So you don't want to miss this. Join in. All right, Oanh, welcome to the OKIRU podcast.
Thank you.
So before we usually begin, we like to sit and share a moment of mindfulness together. Would you like to join me in a few breathing exercises and to start off that way?
Yes, happy to.
Beautiful. So look, the invitation is to come and find a comfortable seat where you'll be able to sit for maybe like 5 to 7 minutes comfortably. So I invite you to close down your eyes if you're comfortable. This is a safe place, so there won't be any distractions or anything that grabs your attention. The invitation is also to now find consciousness in your breathing. Feeling the pace of your breath as you inhale through the nose and exhale out as well. Feeling your body receive the automatic nature of your breath as well. A lot of people believe and think meditation is about quieting the mind and silencing all thoughts. How I see it is observing thoughts that come and go, viewing them with neutrality and non-judgment. And feeling the different dimensions of your breath as it enters your nose, your lungs, and your chest. Feeling your body rise and fall through the process. And in our conversation today, we'll bring up culture a lot. Our connection to culture, what it means for us, and what it means for the wider world around us as well. So we're sitting here on Wurundjeri land, and it's been so for such a long time. For time immemorial. For as long as history can be remembered. I want to honour the connection that our Aboriginal friends have to this land
I want to honor their elders past, present, and also emerging. Young leaders who are fighting the good fight to maintain their connection to culture. So when you're ready, you might want to just gently open up your eyes and maybe gaze around the room and just have a look at where we are in this place and time. Just gazing around and just looking with non-judgment. It's a beautiful space here at the Visi Cares Hub, a community centre. And so do you practice mindfulness or any forms of relaxation?
Short answer is no. I think about exercise, so I think about being conscious of my physical good health, because that's important as a base to make sure I can do everything else I might want to do.
Yeah.
So not mindfulness as such, but in the ways that exercise of any form is helpful to that.
Yep.
And hiking and being outdoors is probably my most favoured form of just making sure I have that connection and that calming time.
Yeah, okay. So movement, activating your body, getting into the body helps you relax and get in tune with life then?
Perhaps, yes. Yeah. It keeps me grounded.
Yeah.
Is perhaps a way I'm more comfortable of putting it. And some of that too is the work I do is very sedentary.
Yeah.
So making sure I move in the breaks that I have from that and in the time that I have away from that is really important to me.
So with your work as a lawyer and as a commissioner of the Fair Work Commission, right? So it's a lot of long hours. How do you deal with, like you're saying, the sedentary nature, but like the risk of burning out as well?
Yeah, look, conscious of that. I've been appointed perhaps earlier in my career than a lot of people are appointed to somewhere like the Commission. So I have another 20 years there. And I'm conscious that I have to, well, not that I have to be there for the long time. I can retire early if I want to.
Yeah.
But I'm conscious that I can be there for a long time. The important part about being aware of burnout is paying attention to your body. And sometimes your physical body will tell you sooner than your brain will tell you when things are not right. But making sure to take breaks. And that's both planned breaks, so leave, but also incidental breaks. The type of work I do, sometimes things sort themselves out before they come to me, and then suddenly I have extra time in my day. And I can certainly use that extra time to continue doing work, but sometimes it's important to just take that extra time as rest time.
Yeah.
So being conscious of when your body needs rest, when your mind might need rest, and when you need to step away.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I'm very curious about your name, Oanh, because a name comes with stories, and it comes with stories that you build for yourself and stories that other people build for you or cast upon you, right? And your journey to Australia as a Vietnamese refugee as well. The name Oanh, I can pronounce it in a Vietnamese style with pronunciation as well, but I'm sure in the workplace and over the years as you grew up, you've probably received a lot of different ways people have said it and all that. How has your relationship with your name been through time?
Yeah. Let me start with a funny story about my name. And it's only funny now because there's a name that we use to mean a certain type of woman of a certain age, the name Karen. And when I was young and first interacting with the non-Vietnamese society, so I came to Australia as a young child. I was 3 when I started school, and people were finding my name difficult to pronounce. I thought maybe I should change my name. Mm-hmm. And I remember really well that at around age 6, the name that I wanted to change my name to was Karen. I never did do it, and in some ways I'm glad, though I know some absolutely lovely Karens.
Yeah.
And I didn't do it because I like my name. And it's easy to pronounce. It just looks difficult because of how it's spelled. And, you know, I have the experience of many people with difficult to pronounce names, especially as children in school, where you get to that part on the roll and the teacher hesitates and you just go, I'm here. It's like, yes, that's me.
Yeah.
There was also a time when I was in, I think, grade 6 or 7 at a really small school in Rockley, in about 10 kilometres from Brisbane city centre, when we had a student teacher come, and I was sitting at the front of the classroom, and the teacher asked me what my name was, and I said, 1. And the person beside me, when he was asked what his name was, he said, 2. And the rest of the class went round and just gave the next number as their name. And the poor student teacher just went, oh, okay, maybe in this classroom of about 20 kids, we all just get called by numbers. And we didn't discuss it. It simply happened because I was the first asked, and the rest of the class was kind of mucking about for this poor student teacher, who at that time probably was no more than 10 years older than us, right? Fresh out of university. And it wasn't until about halfway through the day when our usual teacher came back and asked me to do something, and then asked the kid who was sat beside me too, whose actual name was Philip. So asked Philip to do something, but the student teacher went, oh, I thought everyone was called by number. And the teacher was like, no. How did that start? And I was the goody two-shoes, right? Yeah. So the teacher said, 1, how did this happen? And I was like, I gave my name, then everyone else gave numbers, and it's not up to me to then be like, no, it worked. Yeah. We were otherwise behaved well enough for the student teacher. But the other story about my name having to do with my family is that I've always been, in Vietnamese culture, you do not name people after someone living. So you don't honour someone by naming a child after them in the same way that you do in Western culture. You have to go the other way around, because the idea of saying the name of a elder and telling them off, like, 1, stop doing that, is not right. So you have to look for a name that hasn't been used. Now, my mother is the eldest of 12. My father is somewhere in the top, I think he's about the 5th eldest of 25.
He's one of 25
He's one of 25 children.
From the same parents?
From the same parents.
Wow.
Lots of twins, lots of twins and triplets.
Yeah, right.
They had to really work hard, my parents, to find me a name. And I'm the baby of 8.
Yeah, wow.
Right? So all the names had really been used, and we had to, my parents had to keep going. My mum in particular, speaking with my paternal grandmother, going through names, and my paternal grandmother going, you can't use that name because that's auntie number 6 on this part of the family, and you can't use this name. And it turned out that one had been a name that hadn't been used for a generation in my family, even though it's a very common Vietnamese name. So that's the reason why I'm named my name. It was a name that had not been used in my family for a long time. But I like my name.
It's beautiful. What does it mean?
Well, I don't think it means much on its own, but with other things, it can mean bird. But I don't actually know very much about the meaning of my name.
Yeah. But one of 25-year-old man, you must have a lot of cousins then.
I have a lot of cousins. I don't know my cousins on my father's side very much because his family, their diaspora was much more dispersed than my mother's side. So my father's family, most of them are still in Vietnam, but some are in, some of them are in the US and some of them are in Germany and Switzerland. Whereas my mother's side pretty much all came to Australia.
Yeah.
So I know my mother's side much better than I know my father's side.
So your father was a fisherman.
My father was a fisherman.
Yeah. So with his story, from my understanding, from what I've read, I'd love to hear it from yourself.
Sure. Do you mean the story of our leaving Vietnam?
Yeah.
My father's family, well, where my father's family are in Vietnam is at pretty much the very end of the Mekong Delta as it opens out into the sea. And
what's that called? That place?
It's near Bạc Liêu and near Cà Mau. My father used to describe it as halfway between Cà Mau and Saigon, but nowhere with a name. And he's pointed it out to me on pretty much military maps.
Wow.
But it's not a place as such.
Yeah.
Well, it is a place, but it's not a town. And where the delta always changes, right? Because it floods and so the land and the water changes, and the way places were identified was by the fishing nets that were hung out. They're called hang day. It's a fishing net, and our family home, or our ancestral family home, was hang day Mười Ba, the 13th fishing net thing, mostly sticks in the water.
Wow.
And that's where my father grew up, and he owned, and his family owned a bit of land around there and fishing boats.
Yeah.
And so when my family decided to leave Vietnam, we went in waves. And the waves are both my maternal or my mother's family and then my immediate family. And what happened was 3 of my uncles, on my maternal uncles, they left in 1975, right at the end of the war.
Yeah.
And they left with Vietnamese and American troops with the intention of going to the US. They ended up in a Hong Kong refugee camp, and they actually didn't make it to Australia until after we arrived in Australia.
Yeah.
So we arrived in Australia in 1983. So they were in this Hong Kong refugee camp for a really long time. My grandmother then left, my grandmother and my grandfather and a couple of other uncles and aunties left in 1979 when the communist Vietnamese government said, anyone of Chinese ethnic heritage, you're free to leave.
All right.
It was a you're free to leave, and the alternative is if you remain, we will compulsorily acquire your property and make it difficult for you to continue making a living. So that's when my maternal grandparents left, and they left and they took my eldest brother with them. Now, they took my eldest brother because he had a weak heart. So he was a quite sickly young person. And my father said, take him and let's see if Western medicine will make him better. He would have been, he's about 15 years older than me. And 79 is the year I was born. So he left before I was born, my eldest brother. He left in 79. My father at that time did not want to leave in Vietnam. He wanted to remain in Vietnam. But a few years later, my mother then said, I want to be reunited with my eldest son, with my mum. And now my mum is the eldest, and she was very close to her mother. They were really only 16 years apart.
Wow.
So, they're very young.
Yeah.
And my mother was very close to her mother, and she wanted to reunite with her mother and with her eldest child. So that was around the time we decided to leave. At the same time too, my father's family was starting to find it difficult to continue to make their living in then the communist Vietnam, and the government was again starting to acquire their property.
Yeah. Yeah.
My father, as a fisherman and really familiar with the sea, he coordinated a group of people to leave Vietnam, and by that time, the communist government was restricting people from leaving. They were no longer happy with the numbers that were leaving. That was not a good look for the new government. So it was hard to leave by that time, and that was around 1982 that we left Vietnam. My father said it wasn't safe to go on the ocean to Australia or the US. So there was no attempt. He wasn't going to make an attempt to go all the way to a country that was known to take in Vietnamese refugees. And he only wanted to go to Malaysia, where there were UN refugee camps.
Right, yeah.
And that was where we were aiming for, and the only place we were aiming for. So he set up a boat and he coordinated a group of about 50 people to go on that boat to go to Malaysia.
And the journey itself, how was that?
I don't have any memory of it at all. I have a lot of stories, or told a lot of stories. But during the journey itself, my father knew that pirates attacked Vietnamese refugee boats.
Yeah.
Because there were lots of leaving, and lots of Vietnamese people would leave with all of their possessions and all of their money, or all of their wealth, which was often in the form of gold, and gold sewn into clothes and things like that. That's certainly how it was for my family. My mother sewed gold into the hems of all kinds of things. So my father had painted sticks to make them look like guns, and he made his boat look like a pirate boat, so that if they were attacked by pirates, if we were attacked by pirates, they could pretend to be pirates to fend off the attack. And we were attacked by pirates. There's a story that is told a lot in my family, and it's told a lot to me because it's about me. And it's when you're in a large family, you end up with a personality in that family. Mine was as the troublemaker, because I'm the littlest, right? So I'm causing trouble. And, this story is told, and we tell it with humour. But I think back on that, and I think what this must have been like for my parents. I think, we tell it, and we tell it jokingly, and I will tell it. I will get there. I'm just building up the suspense for you all. But it must have been awful. Must have been awful for the adults on that journey. Anyway, the story is this: when my father saw pirates coming towards our boat, he put all of the women and children into the hull, so into the part of the boat so it just looked like men were on that boat, because women and children would not be pirates. So the women and children were down in the hull, and we had to stay down there until whatever things the men were doing made the pirate boat believe that they were also pirates and depart. But apparently I wanted to get in on the action, so I kept trying to come out of wherever we were hiding and trying to get away from my mum and get away from my brothers and sisters who they all knew, because they're all older than I am,
of course.
and they're all sensible to behave, and I just wanted to know what was going on. That was the story, and that my father ended up having to sit on me. So he couldn't be the one leading the group of men. He had to sit on me to stop me from jumping up and down and giving us away to the pirates. We didn't end up being attacked. We did end up fending them off, and we did end up making it safely to Malaysia. I don't know much more than that about our journey. The stories my family told were always about, there was some part where we talked about the hardship, but we always conveyed it with humour, and that was part of how we coped, I think.
It's
how my
Asians
parents
deal
coped
with emotions as well,
absolutely.
right?
Bottle it up and you just talk about the good stuff. So, I don't know things like how long it took in real times. I don't know a lot about how my parents felt about it. I have a bit of a sense of how my mother felt about it, but only because in 2005 I travelled with my parents to Vietnam.
Incredible.
And I said to my father, can you show us how we left? Can you show us the journey? And he said, yeah, sure. And we borrowed a cousin's boat and went on the river and headed out to the sea. And my mum came with us. But as we approached the sea, my mum just started saying, no, we've got to turn back. I don't want to do this.
Of course.
And I thought, I'm just curious. It's really just intellectual curiosity for me. But this is real bodily trauma for my mother.
And reliving and
So
re-triggering.
So we didn't do much more than that, but that gave me a real sense then of the boats are small, the ocean is huge, and just how hard that journey must have been.
Yeah. As you're telling these stories, I sense my emotions bubbling up, and same with yourself as well. Like, it triggers and evokes a lot of emotions that sometimes we let stay stagnant because we don't want to reach there, because sometimes it is uncomfortable, right? In terms of your relationship with your family now, growing up as an Asian Australian, a Vietnamese Australian, what was it like growing up in Brisbane through your younger years?
Brisbane, we were, when we came to Brisbane, we were initially in community housing in Wacol. Wacol is now the men's prison.
Right.
But they were just, I don't really remember them, but they were like demountable housing, and we were kept in family units and given food. And then we were moved into like rented housing, and initially with other families who had perhaps been settled longer. And then we moved into the community itself. We moved to a place called West End. Now, West End, the Aboriginal name for it is Kurilpa, I think. And West End is an inner city suburb. In terms of Melbourne, it's probably much like Richmond, much like Richmond was. So close to the city, gentrified now, but back in the 80s when we were there, the kind of industrial part of the city, and a really vibrant multicultural community, because the waves of migrants that came through Australia came and settled in West End. That's where the jobs were, where the factories were. And so where I grew up was incredibly multicultural. I lived down the road from a rooming house in which there were lots of Lebanese families. There were also lots of Greeks and Italians. And a smattering, not a lot, of Thursday Islanders.
Right.
Were in West End.
Wow.
So that's where I grew up initially. And then when we were able to buy a house, that's when we moved to Rockley, because that's where we could afford to buy somewhere.
Yeah.
And we moved to Rockley when I was probably about 8 years old. But my memories of growing up in Brisbane are fairly positive. Like it felt like we were well supported by the government, that there was, monetary supports to social supports to integrate. It was a multicultural community in West End. Rockley was very different. Rockley was, again, very working class, but it was your white Australian working class. And when we moved from West End Primary School, which had kids from all over, including lots of other Vietnamese kids, when we moved to Rockley and I started going to Rockley Primary School, that was the first time Rockley Primary School had a non-white kid in its classroom.
Wow.
So it was probably there that I would experience your more stereotypical racist behaviour from kids being called names, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it was also primary school.
And kids are mean.
Kids are mean. I was probably mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had my family. I grew up with a really large family and community around me. So I had the confidence of that community.
Yeah. I sense a lot of similarities in how we grew up as well, because I was born and raised here in Melbourne, but in the western suburbs in Footscray, really. And Footscray and the corridor here through Sunshine and then St. Albans as well, a big Vietnamese and also very multicultural as well. And so in the earlier years, have you heard of a film called Romper Stomper?
Yes.
Yeah. Look, that was before my time, but I said my father would experiences similar, but not to that degree, that racism as well. And I think as our families have settled here, the community is getting used to Vietnamese and other migrants. It's become safer for younger people like myself as well. So very lucky to stand on all of your shoulders as well as you bore the brunt of settling and those experiences as well. But I'm curious, how did a young Vietnamese Australian refugee go on to take a 9-month bicycle journey through Europe? Because that's the one reason why I wanted you to come on this podcast. I wanted to dive into this travel story because I sensed it in my life, in my time now, that a career break is on the horizon, and now it's much closer than not. But I'm curious about a bike journey as well, because it's such a liberating and free way to travel.
Yeah, I'd recommend, if you're able, I'd recommend cycle touring to everyone. I don't know how I can connect it to the growing up in Brisbane. I mean, the first thing to say is that until I met my partner, the idea of going on holidays was just strange. My family, and I thought it was my culture, but I don't know for sure, because for me, culture and family are inextricable. But my family, we only ever went places to see people.
Yeah.
And so when I would go somewhere where we did not know anyone, my mother was always like, what are you going to do there? Who are you going to see?
Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to go see the place. But when I met my partner in our university years, and he got me into the outdoors. So we went hiking together. And again, my mum was like, why are you going to climb this mountain and then camp there? Why would you do that? I said, well, much like Sir Edmund Hillary, because it's there, because we can. So I met my partner in university. He was doing his PhD. I was finishing up my law degree. I then did my associateship, which is working for a judge. The judge was in the Supreme Court of Queensland, and they were part of your training to be a lawyer. And then I did my articles of clerkship, which is your next kind of level of training. It's now practical legal training, but back in the olden days it was in articles of clerkship. And I finished that and I got admitted as a lawyer. And at the same time, my partner finished his PhD and he needed to take the next step in his career, which was to do a postdoctorate somewhere. And he applied to go to the UK and asked me if I would come with him. And I'd just been admitted, but I said, sure, why not?
Let's do it.
So we moved to the UK right after my admission. And we were there for about 4 years because that was the length of his postdoctorate. And for me, that was the first 4 years post-admission of kind of embedding myself in my career. And whilst I loved what I did, I was working in a private practice firm. That firm had a major union as its client, and I got to do fantastic work working for individuals and asserting their rights, but I was pretty burnt out by it. And I didn't feel that the firm, I didn't feel entirely that the values of the firm aligned with my own, and I didn't see a clear future in that particular career path, like the following the firm career path of solicitor and associate partner and so on, and certainly not in the UK and certainly not in the type of firm that I was working for. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. But our time in the UK was coming up, and because it was a time when we were really embedding our careers, we hadn't travelled as much as I had hoped or expected we would when we were living in the UK. So I said to my partner, why don't we cycle home? And he said, yeah, let's do it. So then we spent ages planning it.
Cool.
We're both nerds. So we spent ages researching the right kind of bikes, and it's still the bike I cycle on now, the bike that we took cycle touring.
Cool.
And in the UK, we got into cycling as our commute to work,
Gotcha.
which I'd never done in Brisbane. Now, I don't know if you've been to Brisbane, but you grew up in Melbourne. Melbourne is flat. Brisbane is very hilly. So we never and hot. So we never cycled in Brisbane. But in the UK, we started cycling to work because we also lived quite close to work. We lived maybe less than 5 kilometres from work. So we cycled to work most of the time and got really used to cycling. And cycle touring was just a thing in the UK. People, I mean, they probably didn't go on as long a journey as we did. But, you know, it was easy to ride in these beautiful country roads, these village roads. So that was kind of where the idea came about. And we always were going to come back to Australia after our overseas stint. But instead of coming back straight away, because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life anymore, we went on the cycle tour instead. And it didn't end up being cycling from the UK back to Australia. There are bodies of water in between that make that difficult. We ended up cycling mostly around Europe and North Africa.
Wow.
And then we ended up flying home from Germany back to Australia.
So where in North Africa did you?
Just Morocco.
And what was that like, cycling through Morocco?
Morocco was amazing. It was the one place, because the rest of our tour was in Europe, it was the one place where language-wise we just didn't have a base. Whereas, you know, in Europe you can get on. And Morocco was just a really interesting cultural place to be in. we were there for quite a long time, partially because Morocco's really big. And it was probably the place where I had the most kind of there's a term for when you're trying to acclimatise to a culture, and I've just lost the term for now. But it's when you just react.
Culture shock?
Culture shock. You know, there was plenty of times when I just needed to hide out in a hotel room.
Yeah.
And that culture shock had to do with my gender. It had to do with being a woman in a strongly Arabic Muslim community.
Yeah.
And the way we had done it. So when we got to Morocco, we'd already been cycling for 2 months. We went through France and Spain, and then we got on a ferry that took us to Morocco. And we'd fallen into a groove as to how it was.
Yeah,
that
you got
we
comfortable.
operated.
Yeah.
Well, my partner is male. So whenever we were setting up for the night, he would pitch the tent and I would do the cooking. But also when we were trying to find somewhere to stay, I would do the negotiating about our hotel rooms. So I would go and look and I would ask and all that. In Morocco, that was really difficult. It was like no one wanted to talk to me. And I wasn't used to that.
Yeah.
And it would just make me really mad. Like, and trying to have to navigate the not getting angry at people because they're just operating in the way that they know how, but it's coming up against a way that I'm operating. So I had to really pull back on some things, and then, you know, we had to swap up how we did and Nick, my partner, had to do most of the negotiating and the talking when really that was my role.
Yeah.
Like, I did that. But
You're the lawyer.
I'm the lawyer. The landscape was beautiful and the people were beautiful.
Yeah,
The people were hospitable and amazing. And some of that hospitality too was actually quite difficult because when you cycle tour, you're very self-reliant. And sometimes we would just want to pitch a tent somewhere. In Morocco, despite it seeming like no one was around, there was actually nowhere that was really entirely wild, unless you were probably deep in the desert and we never quite got there. It was always the case that you were on someone's property, and often they would know that you were there. So there were occasions when we would go somewhere, we'd pitch a tent, and then people would show up and they would want to know what we were doing, not in a bad way. So they weren't saying they were just curious. But they'd come and they'd sit down around us whilst we were cooking dinner, setting up the tent, whatever. They would just come, sit down, and watch us. So you'd have to engage with that.
Yeah, of course.
And I was also conscious too that despite us being cycle tourists and seeming like we were quite poor because we're travelling with all of our possessions on the back of a bike, the disparity in our wealth was actually huge, right? And we were always offered things. Sometimes people would trek in the middle of the night carrying a tray of tea and biscuits because we'd pitched up a tent on their land, and they'd come and sit with us, and without sharing a common language, we'd kind of sit there and sort of share stories. Even without sharing words, we would communicate something about our journey, about their lives. Morocco was wonderful. We were there too long for my liking. I was worn out by it at the end.
Yeah. I've experienced living and staying in Islamic Muslim countries like Iran and Pakistan, and I've found that their hospitality is incredible and similar to your experiences of inviting you in for just a cup of tea. They might not be able to share any words, but I think as a guest in their country, the invitation is always there, and it's so beautiful to build that connection and to one of my favorite things is trying to make people laugh when you're not sharing a language as well. And just, yeah, gives me really fun memories when you're talking about it as well.
I have a very good story for that, for Morocco and our cycle tour, which this is a podcast, so it's audio, so I can't do any of the visuals.
No, we've got cameras for videos as well.
But we were in this village in South Morocco, so in kind of the desert area, actually in the area where I think a couple of years ago there was a big earthquake in Morocco.
Okay, yeah.
It was in that area, in the Atlas Mountains region. And I don't remember why now, but we wanted to buy some candles. So my partner was looking after our bikes whilst I was at the shop trying to buy candles. The shop was not a shop like we know shops. You don't walk in and browse the shelves. It was pretty much like a hole in the wall, and you ask for what you want and you got given it.
Yeah.
Now, I couldn't ask for what I wanted because I did not speak Berber, but I bought some things successfully. So I bought some bread and some tuna and some avocado for our dinner and for our lunches. But I really wanted that candle, and I tried asking for a candle in French and in Spanish, and then tried other words that might be like light and candle. And then I tried to mime a candle.
Yes.
Now, I don't know what you're trying to visualize as you think, how would I mime a candle? And my partner said, he was standing about 5 meters or so away with our bikes. What I didn't know was I was facing into the store, and I was just trying to talk to the storeholder. The storeholder was dying laughing, and he kept calling people. So his family ended up joining him at the window, watching this person trying to communicate candle by mime. And I mimed lighting a candle, and I mimed being a candle, and I mimed a flame. And then behind me, the village was gathering as well. And the only reason I knew that was because I started hearing laughter from behind me. So I turned around and I looked. And basically the storeholder and all of these people were trying to work out what on earth I wanted. And they all really wanted me to get what I wanted.
Yeah.
But I was also causing much laughter. And there was a lot of goodwill.
Yeah.
But I was not succeeding in communicating what it was that we wanted. My partner, realising what was going on, got out a notebook and drew a candle. And he...
Yeah, he's the PhD, he's the smart one,
yeah,
right?
I know. He's the clever one in the relationship. And he came round and tore off the piece of paper from his notebook and handed it to the storeholder. And the storeholder looked at it and died laughing even more. But then got us our candles and, we could convey to the whole village what it was that I was trying to do. And he was like, why did you try to mime a candle? They're the easiest thing in the world to draw. It's like, it didn't occur to me.
I would have tried to mime it as well, be like...
That's right.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, this is a wick. This is a wick, and here's the flame.
Yeah. But it's communicating through body language, and you're making very exaggerated movements as well when you're in a foreign land. How has that skill been deployed in your career then? As you're cycling, you're in charge of your own destiny and livelihood as you're moving very slowly through these lands as well. You're forced to communicate with people and to just to wing it as you go along. Yeah.
I like to, what I learned from it about communication is about goodwill. It's not about a shared language, right? Do you want to understand me? Do I want to try to help you understand me?
Yeah.
And we might get there. It's also maybe thinking out the box and maybe having someone else bring a different brain to it as well.
Yeah.
But communication is so much of it is goodwill. And if you want to communicate something, you will. I like your speaking to the self-reliance, because it was another thing that it really taught me, that I can be, or perhaps not. I can look after myself, but it also doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take a lot to survive. You don't need very much.
For sure. And how about Vietnamese parents? Vietnamese parents seeing you on the road cycling in the middle of Northern Africa or in Europe. Why the hell would you do these things? Can't you take a bus like a normal person? Are you crazy?
Yes. My father pretty much conveyed it as a, when you're finished with your holiday, what are you going to do with your life? But I think in my family, I was always the odd one. I was the youngest. I was the one who'd grown up the most in Western or in Australian culture.
Yeah.
So, and my older brothers and sisters had done all of the, I like to think of it as just wearing down my parents. They were just too exhausted by the time it got to me to be perhaps the strict, stereotypical Asian parents. But also, despite something like cycling being unusual, I was otherwise a pretty good kid who had her life mostly on track.
Yeah.
So my father in particular is just, I do not understand what you are doing, but just tell us you're safe and keep on. And then when you get to Australia, do something sensible. My mother cared more about how old I was and the fact that I didn't have a child yet. So she was always very worried about
How old were you
that.
at the time during the journey?
That is a good question. Do I remember? Or can I do some maths now? I would have been in my early 30s.
Oh, right. Really?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Which is that right? Which for my mother was too old to not have had a child yet.
Yeah. Wow, that's inspiring, because look,
You still can, Liam.
I can still do it.
You absolutely.
One of my dreams is to go from India to Europe overland.
Yeah.
And so through all the stands and through that way. I've got a friend who did the opposite way. She went from Spain, and now her intention was to go to China, where her ancestors are from. So she's in China at the moment. She cycled all the way there.
That's fantastic.
Alone as well. Really incredible. And I've been inspired to, I'm like, is the bike the right method or not? It's a long journey. Yeah. It's a long journey.
The stands was one of my things. I haven't travelled to any of the stands, but about the only preparation we did for the cycle tour, aside from buying the bike and the gear, was to study Russian, because we were like, we're going to travel through, through Turkmenistan and all of that region. And Russian is the common language there. Yes. So we studied Russian. But we left the UK in autumn, and just the way we were doing the journey, and we took detours as we wanted to, right?
Yeah.
When we stayed long, we weren't expecting to like Spain as much as we did.
Yeah.
We love Spain, so we just detoured for longer there. The parts of Morocco that we liked were the high Atlas regions, so the mountainous regions. So we just took longer there. And then mapping out our journey made us realise we'd end up in
middle of winter.
There in the middle of winter.
Yeah.
And it also meant if we were going to try to make it at a certain time, we would have to bomb through Turkey.
Yeah.
And Turkey is huge. There was also a bit of unrest at that time in the Kurd region.
Yeah.
So, having to think through all of that. And then there are visa issues as well. There's one country in particular, I don't know if it's changed, but certainly at the time that we were travelling, tourists could only get a 5-day visa. including cycle tourists,
Yeah.
to get across Turkmenistan.
Yeah.
So-
I've read about that.
Yeah, so
as
you'd have to
well.
cycle upwards of 100 kilometres a day. You'd have to bomb through Turkmenistan to make it.
Yeah.
And, you know, when we were continuing to look into our journey, we realised that's not why we're doing it.
Yeah.
So the stands have been on the back burner. And I still really want to travel there. I really want to cycle the Silk Road.
Yeah.
You know, that's the
yeah.
the attraction for that area for me. But I also like mountains. So that the high mountain, the Pamirs.
Yeah.
I want to see them, and I think we still will. We're still physically well.
Yeah.
Might have to wait until my daughter either agrees to do it or is old enough that she doesn't have to come with us. But yeah, it's very much on the I'd love to go there list.
Yeah. I would recommend Pakistan. Similar to you, in 2019, when I quit my job the first time, another job, I was looking at the map, I was like, India to Europe. And then I found myself in like September to November, and I was like, all right, it's going to be the middle of winter. So similar issue that you faced over there. But I found a lot of cycle tourists in Pakistan as well, and they've got one road that links from the China border all the way down south to the port of Gwadar. And yeah, it's very untouched in terms of tourism as well. So yeah, you go into a place where there's not many tourists. It's always fun because you do get the extra hospitality because you're special. Unlike, say, if you go into Thailand right now and you're a number that comes and goes, and you're like,
You're a pest at the moment as well.
Yeah, exactly. So now I'm curious about your role as a commissioner, the commish. What does that entail? Because there's a lot of different. It's a senior role in government, right? Across different portfolios and all that. And there's like the Multicultural Commission and other commissions. What's the role of a commissioner?
Well, the term commissioner might be a slight misnomer for what I do. The Fair Work Commission is a tribunal, so it is a court-like body.
Yeah.
It makes decisions where the Fair Work Commission is Australia's national workplace relations tribunal. So if you have a problem at work, it is likely that the Fair Work Commission can help you, or that it is to the Fair Work Commission that you would go to try to sort it out. We resolve workplace disputes. Disputes like flexible working requests. So topical at the moment is working from home, and at the moment the Commission is looking into putting in a clause in an award so that people can work from home, because that's not otherwise regulated in Australian laws.
Yeah.
We also help people at the end of their employment. So sometimes we help before the employment ends, usually in things like consulting around redundancy. But we also help after employment ends. So people can come to us if they think they've been dismissed unfairly. They also come to us if they want to make an argument that their dismissal was discriminatory for some reason, or because they had raised a workplace right. So they would come to the Commission for those matters, for our kind of conciliation powers. And yes, the key thing we're trying to do is help people resolve the dispute.
Yeah.
But if we can't help the parties resolve it, then we have some determinative functions, some deciding functions, some judging type functions, where you'll hear evidence and ultimately make a decision that says something is one way or the other way.
Yeah.
There's not very much cycle touring.
You're like the coolest lawyer I've met. But it reminds me of like a biblical King Solomon kind of situation where people come to you and you're like, listening and things like that as well. But how has your lived experience of refugee experience and your family story impacted the way you go about work, and how has that helped you to reach where you are at the moment in your career?
So when I was very young, so when we lived in West End, so I would have been about 6 or 7. My parents started working as what are called outworkers. I'm sure you're very familiar with it, or in Vietnamese it's người mai đầu ở nhà.
Yeah.
So people who sew at home. My parents started taking in that work because my mum found it difficult to go work in a factory. My father was too old to go work in a factory. He was also, he did some fishing work for a bit in Australia, but then he was just not well enough to continue doing ocean going fishing. So the type of work that we could do was sewing work at home. But we were at the end of the chain, as it were, and we would get our materials sometimes in the middle of the night. Like there'd be a knock on the door in the middle of the night and we'd be dumped with all of this fabric, and my parents and my older siblings would sew them into predominantly T-shirts. We pretty much just made T-shirts. Through the night. On lots of occasions. I remember that really well. And as a young child, I remember it being wrong. I remember feeling that it just had to be wrong, the way that we got the work, the way that we had to do the work, the way it sent my whole family into complete disarray, and the way we weren't supposed to talk about it. Like we just, we didn't convey to anyone that that's what we were doing. I and my brothers and sisters who were closer to me in age, we were kind of shielded from it because it was really important that we kept going to school, right? So we wouldn't be woken in the middle of the night. But my older brothers and sisters who were perhaps in high school and later, they did that work too. So I kind of, and to finish that part of it, the work for my parents stopped when I was about a teenager. So, they did it for maybe 10 or so years. And they stopped because they got really unwell. Like they just could no longer physically do it. My mother was very asthmatic. And some of that was because of working in unventilated spaces with textile fibres. And they had nothing for that. So I knew that the work was wrong. I knew that it was important to be paid well and properly for the work that you do. It didn't become for me like the guiding light. It wasn't as if as a child I was like, I am going to become a workplace relations lawyer and I'm going to solve this. It mostly formed a kind of nebulous, I need to help people. And because I was my family's interpreter, I learned English quickly and well. I was the cultural navigator, right? I integrated really well. So I was that person for not just my immediate family, but for my wider family as well. I remember really well, I was 8 or 9 in 1988, Australia's bicentenary of our colonisation. And in 1988, there was a kind of amnesty. Anyone who was a refugee or in Australia on a refugee visa or other kinds of temporary visas could apply for citizenship. And they could get it. And I remember, this surprises me now because my daughter is 8 turning 9. But I remember being the person going out to all of my family members and going, apply for citizenship, to my uncles who were 10, 20 years older than me. Are you going to apply for citizenship? Because this is how we get it. This is how we get it and how we stay safe. And most of my family did. But some of my uncles didn't. And, years later they applied for citizenship and they came to me and I was then a teenager. So I still cared, but probably had a bit more of the teenage rebellion. And my uncle's going, we want to apply for citizenship now. Will you help you fill out the paperwork? I was like, well, why didn't you do it back in 1988 when it was easy?
Yeah.
Because now it is hard.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And even more harder now. Yeah.
Even harder again. But that was, I guess some of it was, or where I got to in my career with my childhood was part of that sense of I have an obligation. I have the skills of navigating the culture, but also the skill of dealing with the bureaucracy. They were all things that I was good at.
Yeah. And good at 8 to 9 years old as a kid. Wow. Navigating bureaucracy.
It surprised me because of my daughter realizing, in 1988, I was 8 turning 9. And I remember doing this because I was a pain to my uncles and aunties while I was doing this, going around and trying to persuade everyone to become. And that was when my family became citizens in 1988. I have the paperwork. And yes, so I kind of directed my education towards that. I didn't know that I wanted to be a lawyer either. I mostly just wanted to make sure that I was helping people. But as it turned out, I got good grades in school, and it was a kind of, it was the other Vietnamese thing of what are your options if you get good grades, doctor or lawyer?
Yeah.
I was never going to be a doctor, so that was it.
It's 50-50, right?
That's right. Law was the only career path available to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of it's just been good luck through my career.
Yeah.
Good fortune. But then again, there were also lots of really hard things. Like when I finished my degree, despite having good grades, despite having a great resume, I did all these jobs. I worked retail and was a research assistant and worked in an office. I was a Christmas elf. I loved being a Christmas elf. I didn't get any job interviews, like zero.
Right.
And I ended up writing a really heartfelt letter to the person who did end up employing me, the judge of the Supreme Court.
Wow.
She was just a judicial officer whose decisions I'd read and I thought she was amazing.
Yep.
So I just wrote and I told her so. And I didn't apply to be an associate to any other judges, and I made a call to not do that, and I just went, I'm not getting any interviews for articles of clerkship in any of the firms. I'm not getting interviews to graduate positions in the government departments. I will write to Justice Atkinson and I will tell her why I should be her associate, and if that doesn't work, I'll just have to work out what next.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it did work. But it was hard back then to go, this is what I've done, and I graduated with honours. These are my good grades, and I'm getting nothing. I think it's harder now too. There are even more people with law degrees, but instead of your training years being paid for in a kind of apprenticeship, like an articles of clerkship, you have to do more study before you're qualified.
Yeah.
You have to do the PLT, and that costs money. I couldn't have afforded to do that when I was coming out of law school. So it does worry me now how that all goes for new lawyers, and how the system might be making it difficult for people from poorer and working class families to really get into the law.
And what tips do you have for those young people who are wanting to break in and are encountering certain barriers due to, for one reason or another?
Yeah. Keep going. There are other ways. So it doesn't have to be the usual path, and take breaks if you need to, or step away, and discover that in the stepping away you might get other skills, or find or find your real passion once you've stepped away. It doesn't have to be the traditional path of working in a firm,
Yeah.
etc. There are community legal centres that could use volunteers, I'm sure. There are in-house roles. So it's, being creative in thinking about what else. But if there's a certain path you want to set yourself on, keep going, keep trying. Dory from Finding Nemo, just keep swimming, just keep swimming.
Yeah.
I tell that to myself a lot.
But writing a heartfelt letter to a Supreme Court justice, you said. Yeah, did it come out of, say, you just admired her work at the time and thought, hey, I want to work for you, and it just worked, and that letter changed your life?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a lot of things. There's another good story around the judge. She had been Queensland's first president of the Queensland Anti-Discrimination Commission. Now Queensland Human Rights Commission, but then the Anti-Discrimination Tribunal. She'd been the first president of it, and it was from her decisions in that I really admired her. I'd also been to see her speak at various events, career panels, women in the law things. I was involved in a society at university called the Women in the Law Society. So I'd had interactions with her through that, and just admired her as a jurist, but also as a person. Whilst I was in law school, there was an event which was like a celebratory event for 10 years of Queensland's Anti-Discrimination Act. And I thought, as an event, like I saw the invitation and I went to it thinking that it would be a public seminar with maybe some drinks afterwards. It was a literal party. So I turned up to this venue as a student in probably my second or third year of law at that stage. So, early 20s.
Yeah.
Turned up and realised that the event I was going to was not what I thought it was. It wasn't even a networking event. It was a whole bunch of people who knew each other really well, having a great time. And I got to the door, and it's a literal threshold thing. I had 1 foot over the threshold, and I looked in and went, oh, my God, this is not what I thought it was.
Yeah.
And I went to go away. I turned around to leave, but a person saw me, and that person, his name is Stephen Keim, he's a barrister.
Yeah.
He happened to be the father of a law school friend. He also happened to be the vice president of the tribunal, but he knew me and he saw me at the door, and he came over and he grabbed me and he said, "You're not going anywhere.
Wow.
Come in."
Yeah.
But then he also said, "How did you know about this event?" And I said, "Well, I just got an invitation and I thought Justice Atkinson was speaking and I'm her number one fan." He said, "All right, well, I'll introduce you to some people, but, you don't have to go. Like, everyone is welcome to this event."
Yeah.
So
Great.
I just talked to people and I networked, etc. And at some point in the night, he came over and he grabbed me again, and I walked with him, and he walked me straight up to Justice Atkinson and he said, "Judge, can I please introduce you to your number one fan?" Well, so this was absolutely mortifying.
Yeah.
And I had a little bit of a conversation with her then. And, come 3 years later when I'm applying for
of course.
when I'm applying for associateships, I didn't write in the letter that we'd met and that I was at her number one fan. So I didn't mention
You kept
I
it
didn't
cool.
mention that. But when I turned up for my interview, she said, "Oh, I know you. You're my number one fan." And I'm like, "Oh, there you go."
Yeah.
Being a bit of a dork and being
Yeah.
kind of awkward. Well, perhaps it's not that. Being yourself helps.
But also putting yourself out there
Yeah.
as well. And lucky old mate stopped you, because you would have left and
I would have
a
left.
story would have unfolded another way.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So that's another thing. As awful as they are, go to those networking events.
Yeah.
I know I make an effort when I'm at those networking events to scan the room and to see who might be on their own or looking a bit lost, and trying to make sure I bring the people in, because now I'm
how it
Stephen
feels.
Keim.
Yeah.
Now I'm that person.
Yeah.
I'm in the space, and it's my space. I now need to make sure that other people who are discomforted can be more comfortable in the space to make use of it. So networking is unfortunately really important.
Yep.
But it also gets you the other important things, which is mentors and connections.
Yeah.
Because so much about getting work and succeeding is unfortunately working your connections. So make them. They're hard, but there are also lots of fantastic organisations that are making them easier.
Yeah.
Or finding a common theme. So it's not just that you have to go to law networking, but you and I met first at the Vietnamese Australian Professional Network event last year.
Yeah.
And so events like that, where there might already be a talking point, makes it easier.
Correct.
I used to be principal solicitor at the Young Workers Centre, and the Young Workers Centre had a networking event where we worked on the awkwardness. I would tell, I've more awkward stories than just that one, so I would rotate them every now and then. But that one is a favourite. The number one fan is a favourite.
Yeah.
So I would tell awkward networking stories. But we also did, it was like speed networking. So we'd ring a bell after 2 or 3 minutes and move people on just to make sure, and then we'd have set questions, that sort of thing, to be an introduction to networking, but also to deal with some of the awkwardness of
Break the ice,
But getting your mentors, getting your connections, getting your support network around you, just essential, really.
Yeah. Wow, so enlightening, this conversation from, your family story at the very start, very personal. And thank you for sharing that at the start. When we end our podcast, we usually ask 3 questions. Are you ready for them?
Yes.
What are you grateful for?
I'm most grateful for my immediate family, so my chosen person, my partner, my gorgeous kid. They keep me grounded. They think I'm wonderful, but they don't let me know that they think I'm wonderful, so that I don't get too full of myself. But also my brothers and sisters. My parents have passed now, but my brothers and sisters, they're physically far away. They live in Brisbane, but we're close. And again, they keep me grounded.
Yeah, beautiful. What have you realised?
All through my life.
Overall.
I think about this because I was thinking about this when you were doing the mindfulness exercise at the beginning. That there are things you take for granted, like breathing. That every now and then you realise, if you haven't been doing them well, stuff is not good. And I've realised over time that physical manifestations actually are also my psychological manifestations. When I'm physically unwell, I'm also psychologically unwell.
Yeah. Wow, that's powerful. Very powerful. And the last question is, what is a question that you ask yourself?
Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing for me, for the people who come before me? For the people around me? That's possibly my guiding light. I don't know for sure. But I ask myself it a lot. Is this the right thing to be doing?
Powerful. Thank you. And a bonus question. So on the table, we've developed this card set called the Seeds of Change, right? So there are 3 different images that you can select from, and they come from our values. So one is to have an open heart, open mind. One is the beauty through the struggle, which is from the lotus that lives and survives and comes out of the mud. And one is the tiger, which is to be bold, be real. What do you want to select one?
I'll take the journey. That's why I'm here.
Yeah. And do you want to read out the question?
Of course. What are your fears or reservations of the journey ahead? Do I have to answer it too?
Yeah.
Career-wise, my key fear is actually something I half joked about in answering the what are you grateful for.
Yeah.
my key fear is losing touch. Losing touch with, I don't think I'll necessarily lose touch with my values, but losing touch with the things that do ground me, because it is the type of work in which you can be quite solitary. You make a decision, and the way that you're challenged in that decision is if someone appeals it. But otherwise, you're it. So that is a key fear as I progress through my career as commissioner, that I will lose touch, and that's why I'm so grateful for the people around me.
Yeah,
because they're not all lawyers. My family in particular, whilst they think that I'm doing well, they really couldn't care less what it is that I do, and that's fantastic.
As you progress through your career, as you get immersed into the work, you forget sometimes around you the things that are the most important, like your family, your friends, and things like that, as you get absorbed into your work. So where can people find you on the internet?
I'm mostly just on LinkedIn. I don't use it a lot, but I'm there, and that is a way people can connect with me through my LinkedIn profile. It's my whole name, Oanh Thi Tran, and just make sure that you're landing on the commissioner and not a dentist or a doctor.
And to let you know that they're your number one fan as well.
No, they don't have to do that.
Well, thank you so much again for your time. It was very enlightening, and I hope you enjoyed the experience coming on the podcast with us as well.
Thank you for asking me, Liem.
All good. Thank you.